This is the Comics Alternative, episode 265. Reviews of The Three Rooms in Valerie's Head, Days of Hate #1, and Vinegar Teeth #1. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative. I'm Derek.
And I'm Gene, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
And on this week's episode, Gene and I are going to look at three recent titles. We're going to begin with a new book from Top Shelf and IDW, The Three Rooms in Valerie's Head by David Gaffney and Dan Barry. After that, we're going to look at the first issue of Aleš Kot and Danijel Žeželj's Days of Hate, and that's coming out from Image Comics. And then after that, we're going to look at another #1 issue, Vinegar Teeth #1, from Damon Gentry and Troy Nixie, and this is a Dark Horse release. But before we get into those reviews, we want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are anywhere from 20 to 35% off of the cover price, and every single month you're going to find some incredible specials. Sometimes those specials could be as much as 45% off the cover price, sometimes 50% off cover, but every now and again you can find discounts that are even more impressive than that.
We don't go to even more impressive this month, but we do have a Valiant bundle at 50% off, a Marvel Legacy bundle at 50% off, and about a bajillion D number of DC bundles, all at 50% off except for the variant cover edition, the new variant edition, which is only 45% off. But other than that, it's 50, 50, 50 everywhere.
Yeah, you'll find a lot of discounts on bundles and single issues at Discount Comic Book Service. They'll take good care of you. You know why? Because discount is in their name. That's dcbservice.com. You gotta go there. It's imperative for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your titles there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you.
Ka-ching.
Well, Gene, how you feeling, my friend? It's been a week since we last talked, and I think you've still got the residuals of your flu, right?
I'm on like day 11 of the flu at this point. It's everything you've heard about the flu. It's true. It's evil. I'm conscious, and hopefully you won't have to edit too many coughs out of this, but there's going to be some. There's no escaping it. At least I don't sound like Brenda Vaccaro anymore. For a while, I was deep in Brenda Vaccaro territory.
Oh, okay. Which, depending on which Brenda Vaccaro, is it the one from Midnight Cowboy, which is fine, or the one later in her career? Like, she did a series of commercials during the 1980s, didn't she?
It was the late period Brenda Vaccaro. It was a very deep, throaty talk.
Yeah, and what did she advertise? Was it some kind of like feminine hygiene product or something? I can't remember.
I don't recall.
But hey, she was good at Midnight Cowboy.
Yep, and I was fluctuating between Brenda Vaccaro and the movie trailer announcer. I just kept wanting to say "in a world," and only one man can save them. And that was about all I could say.
Well, Gene, it's kind of sad that your flu is lasting longer than the government shutdown. How's that for a timely comment?
Oh yeah, that's I don't even know how to respond to that one. Does that mean I'm less efficient than the government? More efficient? I'm not even sure. I'm harder working, one way or another. At least the virus is harder working.
Yeah, that's true. That's good. So you want to begin with the first title that we're going to be looking at this week, The 3 Rooms in Valerie's Head?
Yeah, that sounds good. And this is written by David Gaffney and illustrated by Dan Barry, a couple of UK writers and illustrators that I'm not familiar with beforehand. I don't know if you know about them.
No, I haven't read or even listened to anything that they've done. According to the back cover of this book, David Gaffney is also the author of Sawn Off Tales, which I'm not familiar with. And then Dan Barry is an Eisner-nominated cartoonist. I know one work of his is 24 by 7, and I guess that's what he was nominated for. But he also does a podcast, Make It, Then Tell Everybody, and I have heard of that.
I've listened to a couple epissodes of that.
What's it like? Because I haven't listened to it yet.
It's kind of like it's an interview show. To be honest, it's been a while since I've listened to it. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of about the process of creation. It's interviewing creators.
Creators, what? Cartoonists, artists, or any kind of creators?
I don't think it's always cartoonists. This is the flu talking. I'm not positive.
I remember at one point downloading several episodes, intending to listen to it, but then I never got around to it. There are just so many things on my iPhone that I only have so much time to listen to, Yeah, there's nowhere near enough time to listen to everything that I wanted to listen to, much less read, much less watch, much less think about. But you and I both did take the time to read The 3 Rooms in Valerie's Head. And let me ask you, what are your initial thoughts of this book? And we should mention, as actually I did at the top of the show, but this is published by Top Shelf and IDW. And we have a review copy, a digital review copy that, according to IDW, we could go ahead and discuss. But I checked on Amazon, and the pub date for this book is late February. So it may appear in shops before then, but you can get it through Amazon in late next month, I guess.
Okay, well, I guess maybe we shouldn't be too spoilery, but I liked it a lot. It starts off in one place and it goes in very odd directions. It becomes, I'm not even sure magical realism is the right thing to say, but it gets odd quickly on. I mean, it starts off with, the 3 rooms in Valerie's head are kind of like the medieval notion of like the memory palace, where like you've got the different rooms that you keep different things in. So like the front room is like where she does her things. The back room is where she stores things that she doesn't want right now. And then there is the cellar. Mm-hmm.
And that's what gets the most attention in this narrative.
Sort of, but she tends to keep, again, it's all about the 3 rooms in Valerie's head. It's also about the many men in Valerie's heart. Mm-hmm. And it seems like she keeps the men in the, we're told that she kind of keeps the boyfriends in the cellar, but then she brings them all up to the front room right away. And so the things that she's trying to suppress are never suppressed. It's always right there at the top of her consciousness. Right.
And the way that this is described, and especially illustrated by Dan Barry, is in this basement. Valerie goes down, and in other words, she goes into her past, and she brings out these memories of the past relationships or these old boyfriends. And the way that the boyfriends are represented in terms of the illustration, they're gray and they look like corpses.
Right.
And what she does is she sets them up with various instruments, like they're in some kind of jazz combo, playing drums or a saxophone or banjo or just what have you. And every now and again has conversations with them. So, there's this sense that even though these relationships that she's had haven't been successful, she nonetheless can't let go of them because she's always revisiting those individuals, those former boyfriends, and kind of assessing her life in some ways. And I thought that was a clever premise, a way of setting up, as you point out, we get this toward the very beginning, this book, and how we're to read Valerie. However, I'm not entirely sure that this conceit goes anywhere, or at least by the time I got to the end of the book, I was asking myself, to what ends did we have all of this? Okay, granted, I really appreciated the, let's say, sporadic look at Valerie's life, especially in her relationships. And we learn about not only the ways that she relates to men, but also her own art. She is a very accomplished accordion player. And especially in the last half of this book, we get quite a bit of narrative about what accordion playing means to her, how she views it, and also how she contextualizes it, right, with those many elves inside of the accordion, which is quite strange, but I like that. But then by the time we got to the end of this book, and I don't know if it would be spoilery to suggest that she, toward the end, has a quite significant relationship. Let me just, I guess, say that.
Yeah.
But, like all of the others, it doesn't last. And I was left wondering, okay, and?
Well, for me, the end of the book is, it's not super concrete, mm-hmm. which on one level, without giving it away, is kind of ironic because in one way it's super concrete, but it almost ends in a really roundabout way. It reminds me of David Mazzucchelli's Asterius Polyp.
Okay.
Where there's an end that I think we know what happens at the end, but it's not entirely drawn out in stone. And she kind of goes like Asterius Polyp. She's reflecting on her past life, and it's always through the lens of relationships. And Asterius Polyp basically was similar that way. I don't think these books don't look anything alike,
right,
whatsoever. But there's that same kind of ruminative aspect to it. And where he was an architect, she's like you said, she's a master at the accordion. Or the melodeon, or whatever that she records like a how-to tape about.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that inside when she was a child, that what she thought, or what she was told that, or what she thought that where the sound came from was all these little elves in between the folds, in the accordion. And those elves that you see when she's talking about that are the same creatures that we see in the first illustration of the weirdness of the cellar,
mm-hmm.
and those there's some kind of resonance happening there, and I read it quickly twice, and I'm still not sure exactly what that resonance is, but it's something like and the very end of the book, the elves on one sense, the elves kind of are free.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like at the end of the book she reaches a kind of freedom herself, and there's something there, but it's not hitting me over the head, and I'm not sure that it's just subtle, that I need to soak it in a little more, but it kind of floats at the edges of understanding for me.
Right. Now, don't get me wrong, I appreciate the ambiguous ending. And in fact, that's what I usually privilege in my narratives and not just comics. I mean, I hate when things are tied up quite neatly. I would much rather have a story end in a way that there's some question marks at the end, or you don't know exactly what happened. You may have a sense of how things ended up. And I think that this functions in that way. So it's an ambiguous ending. I do like it that, as you mentioned, on the very last page of the story, we do have the elves are coming out of their case, and they look happy. So, I mean, that does suggest kind of an upbeat ending. Along with that, we get, toward the ending, Valerie's conversation with a past relationship. And this is the last one that she has, right? I guess the most significant one. And she's having a conversation with this last relationship, right? The last guy that she was involved with. And she mentions something about him falling. And she says to him, you fell a long way. And then this, I don't know, memory or ghost of the old relationship, this guy says, so did you. And at that point, she steps off of the edge of wherever it is she's standing, and kind of like a cartoon character walks on air, and then we get the case with the elves. And so there does seem to be a sense of resolution toward the end, or at least Valerie has come to a point of understanding, perhaps. I can see that. And I like the ending, the way that I just described it, with the old relationship, the elves and the case and whatnot. It's just everything that led up to that seemed, I don't want to say meandering, because it was a series of relationships, one, then another, and then another. And I was wondering, did we need all of that to get to a particular endpoint? And maybe we did. Perhaps on another rereading, I can go back and, after talking with you, appreciate it a little more.
Yeah, well, it feels like everyone. I mean, again, I think there's half a dozen boyfriends or so.
Yeah.
That she moves through, but it seems like every one of them is different and weird in his own way.
Oh yeah.
But she responds to each of them differently also. And it feels, if not exactly like growth, at least different kind of perspectives on how she interacts with them and also the world. I'm not really sure. The one that I was the most curious about actually is what's his name? His name is Danijel. This is like almost smack dab in the middle of the book, and his is the only one where suddenly we get a different perspective when he's telling his own stories, and we kind of get this parallel narrative between the normal comics narrative and then like a much more rough crayon drawn narrative of his perspective on things. And I like that a lot, but I'm not quite sure why we only get that from him. It's much more rough hewn. It's clearly in the same style, but it's a much more kind of a childlike way of doing it. I like it a lot. I like the contrast.
Yeah, I like the way that Barry changed his art in some ways to accommodate, a change in story level, right? So a story within a story is what's we're experiencing right here. The relationship that I thought was the strangest that Valerie had was the one that takes place, I don't know, around 85, 86 pages in. And this is
Gus?
Yeah, the guy with the jar bottom glasses, the jam jar lenses. He wears glasses that makes things blurry. It's his mother's old glasses. And for some reason, he has this fetish about women who are blurry. And this really turns him on. So he can only be with Valerie when he wears those glasses. And, okay, that's strange, but not too strange. But what gets real strange is the fact that at one point he brings home a couple of other friends who have the same fetish, who wear these distorting glasses that makes everything blurry. And then Valerie leads them out to a shed in the backyard, and she gives them cereal and milk. Then she locks it. Then she invites some other people over for a cookout. And then she and the other people look at the men as they're drinking their milk and playing with their pictures, which are blurred images, I guess, of women, or it could be images of anything. They see him sleep. They see him play around. I mean, that's a little wacky.
Yeah, it's wacky, and it's a little surreal, and it gives me feelings and responses, but I'm not sure what those feelings and responses are exactly. It certainly creates a very kind of a off-kilter mood. I don't know how to describe it though. It becomes sort of surreal, but I don't want to just use that word because it's too easy to just throw that around. Mm-hmm. But it's somehow we're getting an insight into her, but I'm not quite sure what it is, and I'm not sure that it's the fault of the narrative. I'm not sure. I might just need to spend more time with the book itself. But it's certainly meaning. It's pointing towards a meaning, and I'm just not grasping it yet.
Yeah. Now, there's one thing about this narrative that has me scratching my head, and I wondered what you thought of this. This occurs on page 85, right after she meets Gus. Because, Gus is the shop owner, I guess, of this accordion store, the accordion shop.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's right after we're introduced to him. There is a shift in narration. Up until this point, unless I'm forgetting something, everything was told in a third-person, almost omniscient perspective. So whenever we get information about both Valerie and the men she's involved with, they're referred to in the third person. So when Valerie is referred to, it's Valerie did this. Valerie saw him. Okay. However, on page 85, if you turn to that, you'll see
right.
Gus left the accordion shop soon after I met him and went to work at PhotoQuick. He had worked there for months before I discovered his secret.
I did not pick that up at all.
And then from there on until the end of the book, for the most part, the narration is in the first person. Now, I'm wondering why the shift from third person omniscient to first person Valerie telling this story, because that's who this narrator is.
Right. That's a damn good question.
And I'm okay with shifts in points of view as long as it serves a purpose. I wouldn't think that this is sloppy storytelling. And so I'm trying to wonder, what is the significance of this shift of perspective? Does it have much to do with the fact that she's coming more into her own when it comes to relationships? And if that's the case, the relationship with Gus really isn't that point, at least the way I read this. It's with the relationship that follows. The guy that I think she meets at this cookout that I mentioned earlier. But
right.
And so had the shift in point of view happened around that point, it would make a little more sense to me. But I can't figure out why at this point, right after we're introduced to Gus, does the point of view, the narration, change from third to first person?
Yeah, you're right. That does feel like there should be, and I totally missed that on both read-throughs that I did on this. It seems like, there should be some kind of thematic reason for that to happen, and it doesn't feel like this is the moment where that seems so. It doesn't seem like a breakthrough moment for her as much, because she doesn't really have one. Like you said, like the last one is a little more significant to her, and that might make a little more sense to move into her perspective. But yeah, I honestly don't know, and that is kind of strange.
But other than that, I did appreciate the way that this story was told.
Oh, yeah, it's really engaging, and it starts off almost like a picture book, because it seems, if I remember right, the first several pages are all just like single panels. Like each page is like almost one big panel, but then eventually it breaks down into more kind of traditional comic storytelling. But at first, it felt like it was a little more storybook like. And then as the story becomes more complex, actually no, I'm a total liar, because it's there right from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's something about Barry's art that also has a kind of storybook feel to it, right? It's a cartoony style. It's rather minimalist. I think it's charming, and it works for the kind of story that's being told here. But I think that you could look at some of these images without reading any of the text, right, to get a sense of what's going on, and think at first, this could be children's book art.
Well, possibly, yeah. It's got that kind of a brushwork with like water, and it's with watercolor underneath it. But yeah, but like the facial expressions and everything, even when they're simple, they're usually really expressive. These aren't just generic faces all the way through. You can really tell. We've said if you just ignore the words, I can tell emotion on every single page.
Right. Yeah. Even with the what, if we want to call them corpses or memories, the past relationships that she brings up from her cellar in her mind. Right. Even those people, as gray and dead looking as they are, have expressions, and you can get a sense of, maybe who they are, which could be dead, at least dead to her, as many of them look. So, yeah, this was an interesting book. I'm curious to see what a physical copy looks like, because the PDF that we have is kind of an oblong shape. So I don't know. I haven't looked up on Amazon the dimensions of this book. But I know that every now and again, Top Shelf comes out with different shaped books, which I appreciate. So I'm curious to see what this looks like in hard copy.
Yeah, they're very object based, and it's also it looks almost it's the same kind of proportions as like a Posey Simmons comic or something like that. So,
okay, yeah.
Since they're UK artists, that seems like they're following along that same sort of tradition. But again, it's like a sort of half-page Tintin thing, also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, if this is going to be like one of those a little snug little book or a little larger, like more like a Carol Leigh size or something like that.
What do you want to move on to the second title that we're going to be looking at this week?
Yeah, this is Days of Hate, which is a very of the moment book from Image Comics. And again, I don't really know how to pronounce the creator's names.
Yeah.
The writer is
Aleš Kot.
Aleš Kot.
Yeah, he is the writer, and then I believe you pronounce the artist's name Danijel Žeželj, I think. It's the last name is Zezelj. This is coming out from Image Comics, and the first issue was released last Wednesday, January 17th. Just recently, on another episode of the Comics Alternative, Gwen and I looked at the first trade of Aleš Kot's Generation Gone, also an Image title. In fact, Aleš Kot does a lot of work at Image, creator-owned stuff. I mean, he does some stuff at Marvel as well, but I know that he has quite a number of titles over the past several years through Image Comics, and this is his most recent. And as you mentioned, this is a very timely narrative. It takes place, from what I can gather, in the year 2022, because we get reference to that on the very first page.
Right.
And this is an America that seems to be, I guess, the logical conclusion of where we are in terms of Trumpland right now. In other words, if the resisting forces weren't effective, then we would get a kind of political climate that seems to be the case in Days of Hate, where a variety of different groups, anti-immigrant, white supremacists, Nazis, alt-right, whatever you choose to call them, and many of those terms are used in this first issue.
Right.
They, if not controlling things, then they are affecting society much more than they had, let's say about 5, 10, 20 years ago. And so this is an America that we have right now. Along with that, there seems to be a governmental reaction to a lot of not only, I guess, immigration issues, or let's say non-white presence, but also to the various hate groups. And we see this in a figure who appears, I don't know, about halfway through this first issue, an agent by the name of Peter Freeman, and he tells what character, or what was her name? Huan Xing. Yeah. He says that he is the head investigator of the Special National Police Unit for the matters of domestic terrorism. Okay, so not only is that a long title, but it is a rather sinister governmental title.
Right.
And the conversation that Freeman has, ironically, his name is Freeman, with Jing, is quite disturbing. So it's disturbing from an empowered governmental perspective, but it's also disturbing in terms of the alt-right or the white supremacist figures that we see in this first issue as well.
Yeah, and we seem to have our two focal characters are, like you said, Huan Jing and then Amanda, who we find out over the course of the book were married at one point and are no longer, and Amanda became radicalized.
Right.
And so we've got and as we learned, like you said, through the interrogation by Freeman, which again is a kind of an ironic name on all kinds of levels, that their personal beefs are going to become probably the core, the kind of spine of this book. And you said for like the social aspects and things like that, they mentioned a civil war at one point.
Mm-hmm.
Also, and it's we're not getting a lot. The story's kind of noir, the art's kind of noir also. Mm-hmm. Which led me to a couple of things that were a little confusing at a couple points. But the art is really beautiful, but we do lose, I think, some nuance every once in a while.
I'm with you on the, at times, a little confusing end of things, because there's some matters that occurred in this first issue that I wasn't exactly clear on. But I was okay with those whenever they occurred, because I thought, okay, this is the first issue. Some of these questions that I have may be answered in the next issue or two. Mm-hmm. I do think that the function of a first issue is to provide you with enough context, but at the same time leave a variety of questions to where you will want to read on with the next issue and then the next. If you leave a first issue and you're completely clueless as to what just happened, and someone would say, oh, well, maybe if you can find out more in the second and third issue. But again, if you leave the first issue too confused, then I think that is highly problematic. It wasn't a problem here with this first issue. I have questions which I think will be answered. This is a series that I'm going to keep up with because I'm intrigued by what they're doing here. One of the questions that I had occurs toward the very beginning when we see Amanda and then her colleague, and I don't know if we ever find out, at least in this first issue, her colleague's name.
I don't think so, no.
Yeah, they're in what looks like an abandoned warehouse, and they see a swastika on the wall, and Amanda is talking to her colleague. Remember when all we hated... When we all hated on 2016 online, called it the trash fire, and then on 2017, 2018, the elections, people don't even hate on 2022. They're catatonic. And so as Amanda is saying this, I'm thinking, okay, these two are cops, because they're talking about this is, the place where some kind of alt-right group was hiding out, or they wrecked this place, or whatever they did. There was some arson involved, and they even speculate that this may be the work of one organization called the Knights of the Black Sun. And so I thought, okay, so they're cops doing an investigation. And as you point out, the art has this noir feel that lended itself to this assumption. But then they make reference to the LAPD, and we're given context that they're in Los Angeles. So they're referencing LAPD, which means that they're not LAPD. So if they're not police, then who are they, and what is their relationship with these alt-right groups? Now, later on, we see these two. Amanda goes in disguise into, I guess it's a bar where a lot of these Nazis are hanging out, and does several things. I don't want to give too much away here. But by the end of this first issue, I didn't know what these two characters are, Amanda and her colleague. Were you able to figure this out?
It feels to me they're like, it's not exactly Antifa, But I think they're the resistance, to use Star Wars terms.
Yeah.
They're definitely the resistance because, again, what they discovered at this beginning here is, as again her unnamed colleague says, an underground party full of queer people gets multiple Molotovs thrown through the windows. Someone accidentally left a few well-placed and easily flammable objects in close proximity to specifically those windows. So it was a place for genderqueer people to hang out, and then the swastikas are like the graffiti after, like tagging, saying we're the ones that blew this place up.
Right.
It feels like they're like it's like the Antifa X-Files or something like that. They're kind of like resistance, if not necessarily investigators, but they're like they're almost like underground police. I think they're the people's police rather than the government than the kind of a white establishment government police.
Right, left-wing vigilantes.
Yeah,
and that makes sense, especially later on, about the middle of this issue, when we're introduced to the aforementioned Peter Friedman, right? So if he represents the government in the year 2022, then that doesn't seem much better than the alt-right groups that are causing havoc on their own.
Right.
So it makes sense that you would have this kind of resistance, this, as I call them, maybe left-wing vigilantes that take it upon themselves to fight the white supremacists, the Nazis, the alt-right. Mm-hmm. And what happens when Amanda goes into this alt-right club, suggests as much, right? Because police definitely would not do that. Law enforcement, at least technically, I guess, wouldn't do what Amanda ends up doing.
Right, yeah. And what I found interesting, because you had said that, because she kind of goes into disguise when she goes into this club. And what I thought was interesting was that the disguise that she puts on, that wig, looks a lot like her ex-wife's hair.
Yes, that's a great observation.
So it seems like there's a lot. I mean, she doesn't talk about her past relationship at all. Mm-hmm. But it seems like there's some kind of a suppressed aggression happening there as well, mm-hmm. which just means that I think we're going to get eventually these two characters are going to meet again.
Oh yeah. You can't help it but assume that's going to happen. Now we do get a lot of this exposition, right? The relationship between Hyunjin and Amanda during the interrogation with Peter Freeman, because Jing is telling the story of how they had been married and why they're not married anymore, and what the relationship was like and what she feels about Amanda right now. This is also where we get information about what you had referred to earlier, this civil war. We just get it in passing. I think it's just mentioned on one page. But when I read that, I couldn't help but think of Brian Wood's DMZ from a number of years ago. I really enjoyed that series. And basically you had, I guess, a similar political situation at the time that led to the creation of Wood's narrative world in DMZ, where you get the country divided. You get a more right-wing faction that is attempting to secede. And then you get the other side fighting against that, to where you have a new civil war in contemporary times. This may be somewhat similar to that, and I'm curious to see how the rest of the issues play out and describe this civil war.
Yeah, again, the cover does proclaim this as issue 1 of 12, so it's not an ongoing. They're considering this as like the serialized graphic novel, so it doesn't seem like something that's going to be strung out all that long. There's a clear end in sight, is what I'm guessing.
Right, but 12 issues is still quite chunky. I mean, that's
definitely
a lot of story potential.
Yeah, that's Watchmen length.
Yep, that's right, exactly. So, do you like this? Is this something that you would like to continue with?
Yeah, it's not normally the kind of thing I think I would gravitate towards, but I like this a lot. The art is really intriguing to me. Like I said, the coloring sometimes it's very expressive, sometimes to the point where I wasn't quite sure what was going on, but there was a lot of really neat neat juxtapositions and things like that, and the art has a lot of style to it, and I like what it's doing, and I like how it's doing it.
Yeah, I do as well. And plus, I really appreciate the writing of Aleš Kot.
Yeah, it's not somebody that I'd read before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, check out, I mentioned his other current work with Image, Generation Gone, but he's done other things as well, Wolf, and then especially Zero from a few years ago.
Okay.
Okay, let's go on to our final title for this week. And this is going to be a shift in tone from what we had with Days of Hate. This
Definitely.
This is Vinegar Teeth #1, written by Damon Gentry and Troy Nixey, with art by Troy Nixey. This is coming out from Dark Horse Comics on the 24th, this week. And this is something that I remember seeing solicited a couple of months ago, and I don't know if it was the solicit that intrigued me as much as Nixey's art, because we had a little bit of sample art in the previews catalog, and I really enjoyed that. And I wasn't disappointed with the art in this first issue.
Yeah, I had no idea what I was getting myself into with this. Can I say bug fuck? Because this is messed up in interesting ways. And you said the art is by Troy Nixey, and what I found interesting is that the art and the lettering are by Troy Nixey. And the lettering in this, I'm a lettering junkie, and they're playing a lot with comics conventions here. The lettering in this book is if I can say this, the lettering in this book is a lot of fun.
Yes, I agree. And you're right that it's a really messed up story. But I like the way that you described the lettering as fun. I think that other aspects of this first issue is fun. The art, the way that the main character, Artie Buckle, is drawn. Also, the very premise, which is, I don't know, it's really out there. And in fact, I'm looking at the Dark Horse Comics website, and this is probably the same solicitation that was in the previews catalog a couple of months ago. I want to read it because I think this nicely encapsulates what's going on in this first issue. As a human being, Artie Buckle is a grade A schmuck, but he's a pretty damn fine cop. Good thing, because Brick City is under siege from its citizenry, and only an unlikely partnership with a mysterious, tentacled, extra-dimensional being can put an end to the escalating crime problem. Thing is, there's a danger far greater than Cub Scouts robbing banks. Oh my! Across space and time lies a far greater threat, not only to Brick City, but to the world. Holy crap! Can the two get past their differences and save the planet? Well, of course they can, but getting there is going to be a hell of a fun ride. And this is called, or described as Lovecraft meets Lethal Weapon.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And see, I hadn't read that solicitation at all, and we don't get that... It still feels like it's Lovecraftian small town crime in this first issue mostly, but so that solicitation portends greater, or at least larger things.
Mm-hmm. Now, at first, upon first reading this first issue, I was a little confused by the opening, because we get the setting of Brick City. This is where everything takes place. And apparently there is a trial going on. We don't know much about the trial except that Artie Buckle is a central part of it. And I say we don't know much other than Artie Buckle is involved, because what's going on is referenced as blah, 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 Artie Buckle, blah, 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 blah. And then in the last panel on that first page, Artie says blurp, bloop. And then we go on to what most of the story in this first issue is. Now, when I first read this, I didn't see at the top of page 2 the word before. So I didn't know that there was a time shift.
Oops.
And that's what had me confused. Then when I read it a second time, I noticed that before. So in essence, everything in this first issue, except for the first page, is a flashback.
Right.
To what we get on that first page, which is some kind of court proceeding. And we don't know exactly what. And when Artie in that last panel on the first page says blurp, bloop, those are the same sounds that this strange, interdimensional, perhaps Cthulhu-like, we don't really know, creature, those are the sounds he makes, or it makes. This creature is given an identity later on, and it's in the title, Vinegar Teeth. And how this comes about, we get this interdimensional creature who appears in Brick City through some kind of freak accident of some kind of storm or some kind of dimensional rift, it looks like. And this being makes its way to basically a crime that is taking place, but Artie Buckle, the police officer, is undercover, and apparently he's been working on this case undercover for quite a while. And then when this interdimensional being shows up, kind of screws up Artie's plans, but they do end up getting a number of criminals. And so the mayor is thankful for what this interdimensional being has done in helping to bring many of the criminals to justice. And the mayor wants to make this interdimensional being a police officer. What's more,
why wouldn't you?
Why wouldn't you, right? What's more, the police officer or the interdimensional being becomes the partner of Artie Buckle. And Artie Buckle hates this interdimensional creature. And in fact, when the creature doesn't have a name and the mayor doesn't know how to reference it, Artie says, why don't you call him Vinegar Teeth? Because that's what he smells like, vinegar. And the creature says, I like that, Vinegar Teeth. And so thus he's referred to as Vinegar Teeth from here on in. So it's a strange buddy cop narrative, or at least the beginning of one that we get in this first issue. But it's the fact that we have this strange thing. I don't know exactly what to call it outside of Vinegar Teeth, because we don't know exactly where it came from. You know, Lovecraft is referenced in the Solicit, so maybe there's something like that going on here. It's a weird story. It's a weird story, and I like it because it's weird.
Yeah, it's a little. The style is almost like if Mike Mignola and Guy Davis did a Jam comic. It feels a little like that to me, with maybe a little Rick Gary thrown in also. But there's a lot of.
I see that, yeah.
But and it's a pretty dense story too. For this is not decompressed storytelling. There's some pretty dense pages. There's a lot of stuff that's going on in this crazy damn book. And one thing that I'm that I'm really curious about is what's the deal with Artie, because his word balloons. I mean, Vinegar Teeth's word balloons are in green because he's an interdimensional being. So why not? But Artie's are kind of like a yellow on brick red,
right?
But he seems to be human like everybody else. But he's the only one who has these rectangular, differently colored balloons. So there's something different about him that's signaled just by the lettering. And again, because I'm a lettering nerd, but this is drawing some attention. I don't know if it's just supposed to be the voice or if it means something else, because he's clearly different than every other human being in the story. But he doesn't seem to not be human.
Right. Every other character outside of Vinegar Teeth and Artie, their word balloons are this kind of light yellow.
Right.
Which,
they're round. They're more typical comic book balloons.
Right. And, how I read Artie's, rectangular red word balloons, brick red word balloons, is that he's the protagonist, and he is not only the main character, but also someone who, as the solicit describes, is a grade A schmuck. So he's someone that we can laugh at throughout. He also has a drinking problem. There's references to him being drunk. He falls asleep on the job. He, quite a humorous character. And so I think one way to make him stand out, and he has a really big hat, which is one of the first things that caught my eye when I saw the solicitation a couple of months ago, is here's this character in a gigantic hat. And it looked very cartoonish, and I like that. And so I just thought of that rectangular reddish word balloon as a way to distinguish him. Because there are cases, I thought at least when I first started reading Vinegar Teeth #1, I couldn't tell one character from another at times, but I could always tell Artie because he had the red word balloon.
Yeah. And it may just be a tag, but that's a really extraordinary length to go to tag our main protagonist.
Right.
Because for Vinegar Teeth, it makes sense.
Because he's interdimensional, yeah.
Because he's interdimensional, right, yeah, of course. He's a monster. Oh, from our perspective. God knows what he is from his own perspective. Or it is from its own perspective. Who actually knows? But again, Artie is just, he's a good cop, he's a drunk, but there's something, I think we're going to find out more about him as time goes by.
Yeah.
Especially with the bloop blorp at the beginning.
Yeah. I want to get to that in a moment. I didn't see Artie as anything other than human as all of the other non-Vinegar Teeth, creatures in this story are. I just thought that his word balloon is different in order to pinpoint him as the protagonist and the mover and the shaker in this series.
Yeah, well, yeah, that could be, but again, for me, I mean, it's pretty clear, anyways. It's a really big visual. It's such a extraordinary visual tag to do that.
You're right.
But they do a lot of fun things with the word balloons, like on it's hard to say what page this is, but it's kind of like page 16, sort of. When he and Vinegar Teeth are trying to figure out how they're going to be stalking the docks or whatever, and there's a silent panel where Artie's trying to think, and I had to look at that word balloon really close to figure out what it was. It was a hamster spinning on a wheel,
right? But
it at first it almost looked like abstract writing or something like that. Then it got closer, like, oh, that's what's going on. But he's got a lot of expressive word balloons. Whether it's just like exclamation points like in Tintin or something like that. Mm-hmm. But also there's some of these kind of more illustrative things as well.
Yeah.
So I like how much fun they're clearly having a lot of fun with this book.
Yes. Now I want to get back to something that you mentioned just a moment ago, and that is the very first page, this court scene where Artie says blurp bloop. Now, this happens in the present. Everything after that is what led up to wherever we are in this court scene. So why is Artie going blurp bloop? We don't know yet. That's one of the big question marks after this first issue. But I'm wondering if it has anything to do with what happens at the very end. And the end is quite frantic and even confusing, and not necessarily confusing in a bad way. I'm not sure what's going on here, but it does have me wanting to read the next issue to see what this is. And basically, you mentioned that Vinegar Teeth and Artie are at the dock and they're busting a couple of criminals. But in the midst of that, Artie notices that someone is in his patrol car and is wreaking havoc. And it's some guy who's doing something quite violent. And this guy, in a supernatural way, starts leaping from like one rooftop to the other in order to get away. And as he's doing so, he's saying, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this word correctly, Cullzhathro. It's Cullzhathro. And he escapes to what looks like an abandoned warehouse where there are other individuals who are saying the same thing. Cullzhathro. What does this mean? What the hell is Cullzhathro?
That's a darn good question.
Yeah. And again, it's very confusing because it's thrown in at the very end, like the last 2 or 3 pages. But I don't think it's confusing in a bad way, because it does have me curious. I want to read ahead, but I'm wondering if what we see on the final page might eventually in some way link up to what we see on the first page with Artie saying blurp bloop, which is the sound that the Vinegar Teeth, the interdimensional being, says.
Yeah, and clearly on that first page, Artie is not in his right mind. His eyes are not pointing the same direction. He's sweating. There's snot coming down. He is not. I mean, he's a mess through the whole book, but he is not the mess that he is in this first page. This first page, his compost is not mentis.
Yeah. This has me wanting to read on just as Days of Hate did. So, with these 2 number 1 issues that we looked at for this week, I'm hooked with both.
Yeah, this one especially. I mean, this is big and dumb, but dumb in a very fun way. Mm-hmm. And I don't know either of these creators at all. They're not names that are familiar to me, at least.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with either of the creators. The writer Damon Gentry and also the writer artist Troy Nixey. So I don't know what else they have done. It's interesting to point out, in the solicit, Lovecraft was referenced. This deals with a detective or a police officer, so I guess it's a crime story. And it's published by Dark Horse Comics. I can't help but think of last year, a series that Dark Horse also put out, Weird Detective, and this was written by Fred Van Lente with art by Guyu Villanova. And it dealt with kind of a crime detective noir narrative that had a Lovecraftian twist to it. And so maybe there's something about Lovecraftian crime stories that Dark Horse really loves.
It could be. I haven't read that one, so I have no comparison to do it. But whatever the hell this thing is, I like it.
Yeah, I do too.
So they can use that on their tagline for the second issue. Whatever the hell this thing is, I like it.
Well, Gene, we looked at 3 interesting titles, quite different, one from the other. We started off with David Gaffney and Dan Barry's The 3 Runes in Valerie's Head. After that, we looked at Aleš Kot and Danijel Žeželj, Days of Hate #1. And then we wrapped up with a wacky story, Vinegar Teeth #1 by Damon Gentry and Troy Nixey.
Yeah, that was a good mix of stuff this time.
Yeah.
We ran the gamuts.
Yes, we did, and I like running those gamuts. And if you want to find fun titles like the ones that we discussed on this episode, then definitely check out the website of our sponsor, Discount Comic Book Service. If you go to dcbservice.com, you will find now and every month incredible discounts. That's dcbservice.com. And after you do get your comics there, get in touch with us and let us know what you're going to be reading. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message online via SpeakPipe. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way by picking up the phone and dialing 4153-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
Or you can email us. We are 2guys@comicsalternative.com. Or if you want to just talk to me, I'm Gene at comicsalternative.com. And Derek?
I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com. And you can find us all over the social media sphere, such as on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, YouTube, and we have a Slack channel. You can subscribe to the podcast through Apple Podcast. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn, on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, and on Google Play Music. But you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, simply by going to our website, comicsalternative.com.
There's got to be gigabytes of information at comicsalternative.com now with all the podcasts and reviews and stuff, because we do about like 75 different podcasts a month, right? There's about 75 episodes a month, I think.
It's getting to be that way. Last week, which basically I'm talking about January 15th through the 21st, we published 6 episodes. Now, granted, one of those was a brief, like 15 or 16 minute Kickstarter show that I started back in November, where I look at a comics related Kickstarter project every Saturday. But the others are discussion, review shows, and interviews. And so, yeah, we've been coming out with quite a bit of content lately. I hope we're not overdoing it.
Oh, you deserve the lion's share of the credit for producing all this stuff, so thank you so much.
Well, I couldn't do it without co-hosts like you, Gene, so I appreciate it.
Aw, shucks.
Yeah. Well, you did the Wednesday show with me last week. We're doing this one, and then you and I are going to do next Wednesday's show as well.
That sounds good.
So we will be back then. Thank you for listening. Until next week, I'm Derek.
And I'm Gene.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Hey, what happened?